The foreclosure notice had been sitting in a drawer for 3 months before anyone thought to call me. My name is Brittany Miller, and I am 34 years old. For 5 years, my family believed I was working double shifts as a night shift paralegal while barely scraping by in a small, damp basement apartment in downtown Chicago. They called me the slow burner. They called me the dreamer who couldn't settle down. When my younger brother Brandon bought a brand new crossover SUV, my father stood up at Thanksgiving dinner and toasted him as the only Miller child with a real head on his shoulders. When my sister Lauren got promoted to regional sales manager, my mother beamed and handed her the key to our family's beach cottage for the summer. When they looked at me, they saw a woman who was 34, unmarried, and still carrying student loans. What they didn't know was that, while I was working those night shifts, I was also putting myself through night law school at Northwestern. I paid for every single credit hour in cash, blood, and sweat. I studied contracts under the dim yellow light of the CTA train at 2 in the morning. I memorized civil procedure while eating cold canned soup off a paper plate. And 3 months ago, I passed the Illinois bar exam in the top 5% of the state. I didn't tell them. I didn't post a picture with my diploma on social media. I didn't send a group text. Because after 34 years of being the invisible daughter, I wanted my legal career to belong to me alone. Then came a Tuesday afternoon in October. My mother called me, her voice shrill, breathless, and shaking with a terror she couldn't hide. "Brittany, you need to come home right now. Your father is having a stroke, and there are men in dark suits standing in our front yard with clipboards." I grabbed my coat, grabbed my leather briefcase, and drove 45 minutes to the suburban house on Elm Street. The house my grandfather built with his own 2 hands, the house my father promised would stay in our family forever. Before we continue, please take a moment to like and subscribe to my channel, but only if this story truly resonates with you. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. I love reading where you are tuning in from. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, to the quiet kitchen on Elm Street, and the reason my family believed I would never amount to anything. Growing up in the Miller household, love wasn't something you were given. It was something you earned through performance and status. My father, Arthur Miller, ran a small commercial printing business that had seen its best days in the late 90s. He was a stern, proud man whose identity was tied entirely to appearances. My mother, Evelyn, kept an immaculate house, hosted neighborhood luncheons, and treated our family reputation like currency. Then there was my sister, Lauren, 2 years older, born with an effortless charm that made adults smile and teachers forgive her missed homework. And my brother, Brandon, 4 years younger, the golden son who excelled at high school football and inherited my father's booming voice. I was the middle child, the quiet one, the girl who spent her Saturdays inside the public library reading history books instead of joining youth cheerleading. When I was 12, I told my father I wanted to be a lawyer. He laughed, not a cruel laugh, but a dismissive one, the kind that cuts deeper because it carries no anger, only complete disbelief. "Law school costs $200,000, Brittany," he said, wiping ink off his hands with a shop rag. "Lawyers are sharp, aggressive people. You're too quiet. You don't have the stomach for that world. Leave the big ambitions to people who can handle the noise." That single sentence became the framework of my youth. Every time I brought home an A in AP government, my mother would smile and say, "That's nice, Brittany. Now go help Lauren fold the laundry." Every time I mentioned applying to prestigious colleges, my father would remind me that state school was cheaper and more realistic for someone with my temperament. When I graduated from college with a degree in political science, my father didn't come to the ceremony. He said he had an important meeting with a paper supplier. Lauren got a trip to Europe for her graduation 2 years prior. I got a $50 gift card to a department store wrapped in a grocery bag. I took a job as a legal secretary at a mid-sized firm in downtown Chicago making $40,000 a year. My family treated it as my final destination. At every holiday dinner, Brandon would boast about his sales commissions, Lauren would show off her designer handbags, and my father would look at me and say, "Well, as long as your rent is paid, Brittany, that's what matters." I let them believe it. I let them think I was content sitting behind a cubicle wall filing briefs for attorneys who made 10 times my salary. But every evening, when the office went dark at 6 p.m., I didn't go home. I walked 6 blocks to the law library, opened my textbooks, and read until my eyes burned. In the fall of 2021, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I applied to the Evening Juris Doctor program. When I was accepted, I didn't tell a single soul. For 4 agonizing years, my routine remained relentless. I woke up at 6 in the morning, worked 8 hours at the law firm, attended classes from 6 to 9 at night, and studied until 2 in the morning. I didn't take vacations. I didn't go out for drinks with coworkers. I lived on coffee, scrambled eggs, and sheer, unadulterated willpower. Whenever I visited Elm Street on Sunday afternoons, the dynamic remained completely unchanged. "Brittany, can you grab the serving platter from the top shelf?" my mother would say, not looking up from her salad prep. "Brandon is bringing his new girlfriend over, and we need the table to look nice." I would retrieve the platter, wash it, and set the table while my brother sat on the couch talking loudly about his new golf club membership. My father would sit in his leather armchair, reading the Sunday paper, occasionally offering unsolicited advice on my finances. "You really should look into a second job on weekends, Brittany," he said one afternoon in 2023, while I was secretly studying for my constitutional law final in my head. "Prices are going up. You don't want to be a burden on anyone if things get tough." "I'm managing, Dad," I said quietly. "Managing isn't thriving," he replied, shaking his head. "Look at Brandon. That boy understands hustle. You've always been a bit cautious, haven't you?" I held my tongue. I swallowed the urge to pull my grade transcript out of my bag, the transcript showing a 3.9 GPA at one of the top law schools in the country. I reminded myself of the promise I made in that dim library 4 years ago. Show them with the work, not with the words. Sarah, my supervisor at the law firm, and the only person who knew my secret, asked me once why I didn't just tell them. We were sitting in her office after I passed the bar exam, a bottle of cheap champagne sitting between us on her mahogany desk. "Because, Sarah," I said, watching the bubbles rise in my plastic cup, "if I tell them, they'll try to claim a piece of it. They'll tell me I owe it to the family. They'll try to make my victory about their guidance. I want this degree to belong entirely to the girl who sat in that basement room in the dark." Sarah smiled, raised her cup, and said, "Then keep it locked in the vault until you need to open it." I didn't know that day would come so soon. When I pulled my sedan into the driveway on Elm Street that Tuesday afternoon in October, the air felt heavy with unsaid panic. 2 luxury sedans were parked on the street. In the front yard, standing near the oak tree my grandfather planted in 1968, was a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit holding a thick black leather binder. Beside him stood a deputy sheriff. My father was on the front porch. He wasn't having a stroke. That had been my mother's dramatic exaggeration, but he looked 10 years older than he had 2 weeks ago. His face was gray, his hands were trembling, and he was clutching a stack of papers so hard his knuckles were chalk white. My mother was standing behind the screen door, crying silently into an apron. Lauren and Brandon were already there. Brandon was packing the lawn, yelling into his cell phone about calling his bank, while Lauren stood with her arms crossed, looking at the man in the charcoal suit with venomous fury. I parked the car, picked up my briefcase from the passenger seat, and stepped out onto the gravel. "Brittany," my mother cried out, pushing through the screen door. "Thank God you're here. You need to talk to your father. He's going to lose the house." I walked up the porch steps, my heels clicking sharply against the wood. "What is going on, Dad?" My father didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the man with the binder. "It's a mistake," he muttered, his voice sounding thin, dry, and broken. "It's a bureaucratic mistake. They can't do this." The man in the charcoal suit stepped onto the porch steps. He was cold, professional, and entirely unbothered by my mother's tears or Brandon's shouting. "Mr. Miller," the man said, his voice calm and unyielding. "I am Marcus Vance, legal counsel for Crestview Financial. As of 12 o'clock today, the statutory redemption period for this property has expired. The foreclosure sale was finalized 60 days ago. You received 3 formal notices of default, 2 public hearing summonses, and a final vacate order. You have 4 hours to pack your personal belongings before the locks are changed. My mother let out a strangled sob. Brandon stomped up the steps, pointing a finger at Mr. Vance's chest. Listen here, pal. My father has lived here for 40 years. You can't just throw an elderly couple out on the street. I'm calling my lawyer right now. Mr. Vance didn't even flinch. He handed a sheet of paper to the deputy sheriff. Deputy, please enforce the notice. I stepped between Brandon and Mr. Vance. Stop shouting, Brandon, I said firmly. My voice wasn't loud, but it had a tone I had practiced in moot court, a tone that made everyone on the porch go silent for a fraction of a second. I turned to my father. Dad, give me the papers in your hand. My father looked at me, his eyes clouded with confusion and shame. Brittany, you don't know anything about this. Go inside with your mother. Dad, I repeated, extending my hand. Give me the papers. Reluctantly, his fingers uncurled. I took the crumpled stack of documents from his hands. I flipped to the cover page. Notice of trustee sale and entry of default judgment. I skimmed the dates, the parcel numbers, the interest rates, and the lender's signatures. Within 30 seconds, the entire horrific picture crystallized in my mind. 3 years ago, my father's printing business had taken a massive hit. Instead of cutting expenses or telling the family the truth, he had taken out a second mortgage on the Elm Street house, a high-interest, predatory commercial loan with an adjustable rate. When the rate spiked 18 months ago, his monthly payment tripled. He stopped paying. He hid the letters in his desk drawer. He ignored the court summonses. He paid for Brandon's new car down payment and Lauren's summer trip, while his own home was being auctioned off under his nose. He had buried his head in the sand, hoping a miracle would happen, until the miracle ran out of time. I looked at my father. You hit a foreclosure for 18 months. My mother covered her face. He was trying to protect us, Brittany. He didn't want us to worry. Protecting you? I looked at Brandon, then at Lauren. Brandon, you just bought a $40,000 truck. Lauren, you just redid your kitchen. Did either of you offer to help Dad with the mortgage? Brandon flushed bright red. We didn't know. Dad said everything was great. Besides, I have my own expenses. I have a mortgage of my own, Lauren snapped, her eyes flashing with defensiveness. Why are you yelling at us, Brittany? You're a legal assistant. Do something. Tell this guy he can't take the house. I looked at Marcus Vance. He was watching me with a mild curiosity, likely assuming I was just another panicked family member trying to buy time with emotion. Mr. Vance, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. May I see the affidavit of service attached to the initial judgment? Mr. Vance blinked, surprised by the request. Ma'am, this is a finalized judicial foreclosure. The service was executed in May. I asked to see the affidavit of service, I said, stepping closer and looking him directly in the eye. Under Illinois Code of Civil Procedure Section 2203, substitute service on a residential property requires personal delivery to a family member over the age of 13, followed by a certified mailing with restricted delivery to the defendant's primary residence. Show me the green card for the certified mailing. Mr. Vance's confident smile faltered slightly. He opened his leather binder, flipped through several tabbed pages, and pulled out a stapled document. He handed it to me. I scanned the certified mail receipt. The stamp was from a regional processing center in Indiana, and the signature line on the delivery confirmation was completely blank. The post office had marked it, returned to sender unclaimed. A cold, sharp clarity washed over me. The lender hadn't reserved the notice. They had rushed the default judgment through an administrative docket without perfecting service under Illinois law. It was a procedural fatal flaw. A massive, glaring mistake made by a lender who assumed a small-town family wouldn't have the legal knowledge to fight back. I closed the folder, handed it back to Mr. Vance, and took a deep breath. Mr. Vance, I said, your client obtained this default judgment through a void order. You failed to perfect service under Section 2203. If you attempt to change the locks on this house today, I will file an emergency petition to vacate the default judgment in Cook County Circuit Court before 4 o'clock. I will also name Crestview Financial and your firm in a suit for wrongful eviction and statutory damages." The porch went completely silent. The wind rustled the leaves of the oak tree in the front yard. Mr. Vance stared at me, his eyes wide. "Who are you?" I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out my silver business card case, the one I had purchased the morning I received my bar results, and pulled out a crisp, white card. I handed it to him. "Brittany E. Miller, ESQ. Attorney AT Law. Licensed in the state of Illinois." Mr. Vance looked at the card, then looked up at me, his entire demeanor shifting from arrogant enforcement officer to cautious defense attorney. My father dropped his hands from his face. My mother let out a sharp, audible gasp. Brandon and Lauren stood paralyzed on the porch steps, staring at the silver-lettered card in Mr. Vance's hand as if it were written in a foreign language. "You're an attorney?" Mr. Vance asked, his voice losing its sharp edge. "I am," I replied, standing tall, my shoulders square, my voice resonance filling the space between us. "And I am officially representing Arthur and Evelyn Miller in this matter. You have 30 minutes to withdraw your enforcement team from this property, or I will see you in the presiding judge's chambers at 3:30. Mr. Vance looked at the deputy sheriff, then looked back at me. He closed his binder with a heavy snap. "We will suspend enforcement for 48 hours pending a review of the service file. But Miss Miller, the debt is still real. $240,000. If you vacate the judgment, the bank will simply refile." 48 hours is all I need, Mr. Vance," I said. "Have a good afternoon." Mr. Vance nodded, turned on his heel, and walked down the steps toward his sedan. The deputy sheriff followed him without a word. As the red taillights of the cars disappeared down Elm Street, the silence on the porch was deafening. My father stood frozen near the railing, his mouth open, staring at me like I was a ghost. My mother was trembling, her hands clutching her throat. Brandon took a step toward me, his brow furrowed in utter disbelief. "Brittany," Brandon stammered, "since when are you a lawyer? You work at a desk, you file papers." "I've been a licensed attorney for 3 months, Brandon," I said, placing my business card back into my case and closing my briefcase. "I went to law school at night for 4 years while working 30 hours a week." You went to law school," my mother whispered, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. "Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you let us celebrate?" I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had spent 34 years measuring my worth by the accomplishments of my siblings. "Because, Mom," I said, my voice quiet and sharp as broken glass, "if I told you, Dad would have told me I was wasting my time. Brandon would have asked if I was smart enough to pass, and Lauren would have wondered why I wasn't getting married instead. I didn't tell you because I wanted something in my life that you couldn't belittle." My father flinched as if I had struck him across the face. He took a shaky step toward me, reaching out a hand, his voice raspy and broken. "Brittany, baby, I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know, I didn't realize." "You didn't realize because you never looked, Dad," I said, holding his gaze. "You never asked about my classes. You never asked about my goals. You assumed I was slow, so you stopped paying attention." Lauren stepped forward, her eyes narrow, her voice defensive. "Okay, fine. You're a lawyer. That's great, Brittany. But did you hear what that guy said? The debt is $240,000. Even if you stop them today, the bank is going to take the house in 2 months anyway. Can your law degree pay off $240,000? I looked at my sister, the sister who had never once defended me when my father made jokes at my expense. "No, Lauren," I said softly. "My law degree can't pay off $240,000, but my savings can." Brandon's jaw dropped. "You're what?" "When I passed the bar 3 months ago," I continued, "I was hired as a junior associate at a litigation firm in the city. I also received a settlement share from a class action estate case I assisted on as a clerk. I have $250,000 sitting in a high-yield investment account." My mother sank into one of the porch chairs, burying her face in her apron, sobbing uncontrollably. My father looked down at the wooden floorboards, his shoulders shaking. "Brittany," my father choked out, his voice cracking down the middle. Will you save the house, please? It's all I have left." I stood on that porch, the porch where I had been told at 12 years old that I wasn't sharp enough, wasn't loud enough, wasn't good enough to belong in a courtroom, and I looked at my family. Now I need to pause here for a second. If you were standing on that porch after 34 years of being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated, what would you have done? Would you have written the check? Or would you have let them face the consequences of their own choices? Drop your answer in the comments right now. Type save or walk away. Let's see what you would do. Now, let's keep going, because what I did next set the terms for the rest of my life. I looked at my father. I looked at his shaking hands, his pale face, and the desperate terror in his eyes. I looked at my mother, who had built her entire life around the status of this suburban neighborhood. "I will save the house, Dad," I said, my voice steady, firm, and completely void of sentimentality. "But I will not give you a dime." Brandon stepped forward, angry again. "What is that supposed to mean? You just said you have the money." "It means," I said, turning my gaze to my brother until he stepped back, "that I am not paying off your debt so you can go back to pretending nothing happened. If I pay off the $240,000, I am buying the mortgage from Crestview Financial. The deed to this house will be transferred entirely into my name. Dad, Mom, you will sign a formal lease agreement. You will live here rent-free for the rest of your lives, but you will no longer own this property. Brandon and Lauren will have zero inheritance claim to this house." Lauren gasped. "That's not fair. This is a family home." "This family home was 4 hours away from belonging to Crestview Financial, Lauren," I snapped, my legal training completely taking over the conversation. "Neither you nor Brandon offered a single dollar to save it. You didn't even know it was in default because you were too busy taking Dad's money for your own cars and renovations. If I deploy my life savings to rescue this estate, I own it. Period." My father looked up at me. There was no anger in his eyes now, no defiance. Only the quiet, crushing realization that the daughter he had dismissed for 34 years was now the sole architect of his survival. He nodded slowly. "Where do I sign, Brittany?" "I have the paperwork in my briefcase, Dad," I said, opening the leather bag. "We're going to my office downtown right now." Over the next 48 hours, I worked with the precision of a surgeon. On Wednesday morning, I filed an emergency motion to stay enforcement and vacate the default judgment in the Cook County Circuit Court. I appeared before Judge Reynolds, presented the flawed affidavit of service, and watched the bank's counsel crumble under the weight of statutory precedent. The judge vacated the foreclosure order on the spot. By Thursday afternoon, I transferred $240,000 to the lender, executing a formal assignment of mortgage and deed transfer. At 4 o'clock on Thursday, my parents sat in the conference room of my law firm. They signed the deed transfer, the lease agreement, and the legal representation waivers. My mother cried quietly as she signed her name. My father signed with a steady, solemn hand. When he handed the pen back to me, he looked at my nameplate on the desk, * Brittany E. Miller, Associate Attorney *, and his eyes filled with tears. "You're a remarkable lawyer, Brittany," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I was wrong about you my whole life." "I know you were, Dad," I replied gently, taking the signed papers and filing them into my folder. "But I didn't become a lawyer to prove you wrong. I became a lawyer to prove myself right." 1 year has passed since that Tuesday in October. The house on Elm Street is officially mine. My parents still live there. I pay the property taxes, handle the structural repairs, and visit them every 2 weeks. My mother no longer asks me to fold laundry or fetch platters. When I walk through the front door, she greets me with a quiet, genuine respect. She asks about my cases. She listens when I talk about my trials. My father has changed, too. He spends his afternoons gardening in the backyard, near the oak tree my grandfather planted. He doesn't offer unsolicited financial advice anymore. Last month, he had my law school diploma framed, a mahogany frame with gold inlay, and hung it directly over the mantel in the living room, right where my brother's football trophies used to sit. Brandon sold his crossover SUV to help pay off his own credit cards. Lauren ended up having to scale back her lifestyle when her sales region was restructured. Neither of them speaks to me very often, and when they do, there is a polite, cautious distance in their voices. They know that the family dynamic they relied on for decades is gone forever. As for me, I was promoted to senior associate at my firm 3 months ago. I bought a sunlit brownstone apartment in Lincoln Park with a balcony that looks out over the city skyline. Every morning, I sit on that balcony with a cup of black coffee, open my calendar, and plan my day. Looking back, I realize something profound about ambition. Ambition doesn't need a crowd. It doesn't need applause, public announcements, or approval from the people who raised you. Ambition only needs a quiet room, a sharp mind, and the courage to keep working when everyone else assumes you've already given up. My family never believed I'd finish law school, but when the storm came, it wasn't their golden children who kept a roof over their heads. It was the daughter who learned to build her strength in the dark. And every time I walk up the porch steps on Elm Street, I look at the house my grandfather built, take a deep breath, and remember that I am the master of my own story. Thank you for listening to my story today. If this resonated with you, if you've ever had to build your success quietly while people doubted you, please share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to like, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to my channel for more powerful stories. I'll see you next time.